Hello, everyone, and welcome to Back Ashore, Schmidt Ocean Institute's live series where we gather some of our past scientists and crew from Falkor 2 from around the world to discuss topics related to the research that has taken place in the past on board our vessels. Today, our topic is seafloor mapping. My name is Allison, and I'm the Senior Manager of SOI's research portfolio. Joined with me today are Jenny Paduan, a Senior Research Specialist at Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, who specializes in seafloor mapping and submarine volcanism. Jenny has participated in 3 expeditions on board Falkor and Falkor 2 in 2018, 2021, and most recently to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge on board Falkor 2 in 2023. We are also joined by Alysha Johnson, who recently completed her PhD at University of Wollongong on the Tasmanian seamounts in the Tasmanian coral seas using bathymetric data from the Falkor expeditions in Australia in 2020 and 2021. We're also joined by Tomer Ketter, a marine technician working on board Falkor 2, who specializes in hydrography. Tomer was recently chief scientist on the July expedition on Falkor 2, which took place in international waters off the coast of Chile and created the mapping plans for that expedition. And last but not least, Dr. John Jamieson from Memorial University of Newfoundland. Dr. Jamieson studies hydrothermal vent systems and was recently on Falkor 2 for the last expedition in Galapagos Marine National Park in Ecuador using a new mapping system to create high-definition images of the seafloor. I'm really excited to talk to all of our scientists today about the importance of seafloor mapping and how that can be used to study other aspects of the ocean. And I want to remind our audience to ask lots of questions to these scientists as they're really excited to share their expertise with you. We're going to dive right in and get started with Tomer. Can you set the stage for us regarding seafloor mapping? You have an extensive background coming out of the GEBCO program, and collecting bathymetric data is one of the essential aspects of your job. Why is mapping the seafloor important to studying the ocean as a whole, and how do we do this on Falkor 2?
Hi, Alison. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on this panel. It's really exciting. And yeah, ocean floor mapping, of course, if you've ever gone anywhere or plan to go anywhere, the first bit of information, the most basic layer of knowledge is a map. And right now, we only have about a quarter of the ocean mapped to this day in a resolution or a level of detail that is practical for any scientific work. And of course, what we're trying to do with deep water oceanography is understanding the environment and the processes that shape it. In the case of the ocean floor, it's even more crucial to understand, as I said, because we only have maps of about a quarter of the ocean. And understandably, without a map, we can't begin even to put together the science, the information, the knowledge, the understanding that is needed to understand and protect these fragile ecosystems. So basically, that's the drive for us to go out and map the ocean. And on Falkor 2, we're very fortunate to have the top of the line mapping systems, the best mapping technology out there. We use different types of sonars or different types of echosounders to map the seafloor. We can also map below the seafloor, the substructure, and we can also map the water column itself with similar types of echo sounders, but using different frequencies and different types of sound waves or pulse. And on Falkor 2, we have 3 multi-beam echo sounders and 1 sub-bottom profiler. We have a fisheries echo sounder that is really good at mapping the water column. And we have acoustic Doppler current profilers that help us understand what's happening in terms of currents all the way down to the seafloor sometimes. And with using all that information, we can put together a very comprehensive picture of what are the processes that are taking place and shaping this seafloor environment, this ocean floor ecosystem. More specifically on Falkor 2, we have the EM124 echo sounder that uses a 12 kilohertz pulse to reach the deepest parts of the ocean and give us a 3D terrain model. Very similarly, to the EM124, we have the EM712, uses a higher frequency band for slightly more shallow waters. And the last one we have is the EM2040 that is used in coastal environments and provides very high resolution in shallow waters. We also have a multi-beam echo sounder on our ROV Sebastian that is used when the ROV is diving very close to the seafloor to give us super high resolution, sometimes up to centimeters even, 3D models of the terrain.
Thanks, Tomer, for setting the stage of all the tools that we use to collect this data. Alysha, Tomer also mentioned that we use seafloor mapping to understand the conditions of the terrain and the oceanography happening. And you participated in expeditions in 2020 and 2021 when we did mapping dedicated around Australia. Can you explain how the data collected was used in your dissertation and how you analyzed the data to come up with knowledge to share within your thesis?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. As you mentioned, I was on 2 mapping dedicated voyages, which was absolutely awesome. So what I've now found, having done some other voyages, is not all voyages are mapping dedicated. Most of them will stop for oceanographic activities, or they might stop to deploy an ROV. And this means you sort of do mapping where you can. Whereas both of these voyages were, let's map this area and let's get as much data as we can, which was awesome. So I went aboard as a brand new PhD student, and I had very little developed in terms of my project. So this was actually perfect timing for me to go aboard and to get absolutely involved with the data that we had available. And the Falkor crew were phenomenal in letting me be hands-on, letting me learn about how the data was being collected, and letting me have a go at analyzing it and help the decision-making as well, which was awesome. So my field of study, I'm what I call a marine geomorphologist. So I'm interested in the shape of the seafloor and working out what we can from based on the bathymetry. So the region I studied and we surveyed here in the 2 voyages I was on is shown on the screen. So this is in the Coral Sea Marine Park. It is just south of the Great Barrier Reef and north of Brisbane in Australia. And between these 2 voyages, you can sort of see the 2 patches there. We mapped just under 80,000 kilometers squared of seafloor, which was a huge area of seafloor and a really great contribution towards seabed 2030. And so what I'm interested in, as I see it, is interpreting the seafloor. And specifically, I was interested in the Tasmanid Seamount chain, which is a hotspot chain of volcanoes that run from north to south along the east coast of Australia. They're kind of like Hawaii, so they're formed from moving plate over a hotspot of weakness. And you can see these volcanoes here that can continue in this line of these lovely little cones heading down the coast. And so we mapped about 6 of them in total. And what I've done is I've combined the mapping that we did aboard the Falkor with open access data that's presently available around Australia to do some high resolution geomorphic interpretation. And so by having a look at what these volcanoes look like in 3D and what they look like from their bathymetry, I was trying to understand how they might have changed over time. So I was looking for evidence of things such as erosion. Do they have a flat summit? Because that tells us that they got eroded away when they were presently at sea level. And this could be called something like a geo when it's got a completely flat summit. The ones that you're seeing on your screen right now, you can see they don't have completely flat summits. They've got little terraces or like little caps on them. And these are shown to be areas of carbonate summits. So where carbonate reef-like structures about 15 million years ago formed, and they have formed on top of these volcanoes and have now since drowned. So for context, these volcanoes are anywhere between 1,000 to 500 meters deep. So there's no way that we can explore them without bathymetric mapping. And so based on the Falkor data and the data that I got from open access, I've been able to explore the whole chain, define what the geomorphology of all the volcanoes are, and then make some broader conclusions about the evolution of the whole area. So how have these volcanoes evolved in their shape over the 30 million years since they erupted? And this links into things such as plate tectonics and some environmental change as well.
Thanks so much for explaining the data you collected, Alysha. That's really great to hear what knowledge you gained from the mapping data. And you said one thing that teed up Jenny really well, so thank you for making my job easy. But you said not all expeditions are dedicated to just mapping. And Jenny has been on a lot of projects that have not been dedicated to mapping, but they've used the maps that they preliminarily collect or have collected in the past to inform and guide some more of the science and the ROV and AUV dives and sampling that have taken place. Jenny, why is it important to have maps before you deploy an ROV and AUV, and how do they help you target your sampling sites?
Well, first, thanks for inviting me to participate today. So maps just basically inform us about the terrain that's otherwise hidden from us beneath the waves. It lets us come up with realistic questions to ask on our dives, and we can be far more efficient with our dive time and to really target our sampling. Now we can go directly to a hydrothermal vent, precisely sample on one side or another of a lava flow boundary or across faults, and know exactly where on a feature we're sampling. The higher the map resolution, the better. But having some sort of map in hand is better than driving around in the dark like we used to do, where you could spend literally days searching for a hydrothermal vent that maybe the CTD data had indicated should be there somewhere. And you might also never know what else was out there and miss the larger context of a dive altogether. So we need the ship-based maps first to plan our AUV dives. For example, here, this is what the Falkor did in 2018 to have coverage of the Alarcon Rise and Pescadero Transform up into the southern Pescadero Basin and northern Pescadero Basin. And then we followed that with AUV mapping at 1 meter scale resolution. We're basically bringing the sensor closer to the seafloor, so the beams of sound, which spread out as they travel through the water, are smaller and smaller footprint. And when we fly the AUVs, we typically fly them at 50 meters altitude and can get meter scale maps like shown here in the Pescadero Basin. And that previous map showed the dive tracks then that followed, that we were able to drive the ROV directly to the chimneys. This is an oblique map of one of the chimney fields in the Pescadero Basin. They're aligned along faults, and we were able to collect fluid samples and geology samples based on the AUV maps. So the meter scale data, which is roughly 3 feet by 3 feet for us Americans, is really great for doing geology. You can see details like the hydrothermal chimneys, volcanic fissure systems, lava flow textures and boundaries, faults. The AUVs carry side scan sonar and sub-bottom profiling sonars too, so we can image the backscatter characteristics and the layering within the sediments. The AUVs also carry a CTD and an oxidation reduction potential, or EH sensor, for detecting hydrothermal plumes. And on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in 2023, we also carried a magnetometer. But then in the Pescadero Basin, we weren't able to do this on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, but in the Pescadero Basin in 2018, we mounted our low altitude survey system to the ROV Sebastian and flew even closer to the seafloor at just 3 meters altitude, and we got centimeter scale resolution bathymetry, which is 2 inches by 2 inches. And that low altitude survey system also includes scanning time of flight laser, or also known as LiDAR, to give us 1 centimeter resolution bathymetry data. And we also had co-registered photographs from stereo cameras that are at millimeter scale. And those really high resolution, centimeter scale resolutions are closer to what is significant to the biology. So our geologists, fluid chemists, microbiologists, and zoologist collaborators used the maps extensively, both in 2018 and in 2021 in the Pescadero Basin to sample the various parts of chimneys or across flow gradients, such as indicated by the distribution of microbial mats in the photographs. Really powerful tools. The areas you can cover, of course, with the AUVs and ROVs are tiny compared to the coverage you can get from a ship. So the nested multi-scale approach really is necessary, where you zero in on the high priority places at higher and higher resolution. But those maps really enable efficient multidisciplinary work.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. And as Jenny just said, Tomer and Alysha kind of explained collecting multi-beam data from the ship, where you can get a lot of coverage, but not super high resolution. And then Jenny used some tools to kind of drill down on certain areas in high resolution. And that's what John was on board doing as well in 2023. So John, you wanted to get even finer detail, high resolution imagery, and you used some new technology to do that. Could you talk about what you were doing and the technology that you used?
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny just touched on something really important, is that, higher resolution, we can see things that biological related features on the seafloor that you can't with sort of these more traditional mapping techniques. And my background is hydrothermal vents, and when I first saw that you could map a hydrothermal vent with an AUV, that got me really excited as to how important resolution is for mapping. And then I was at a seafloor mining workshop about a decade ago, and someone mentioned they gave a talk on synthetic aperture sonar, which is something I had never heard of. But it just so happens that I live in St. John's, Newfoundland, where there's a company called Kraken Robotics, and they're one of the world leaders in this. So I started spending a lot of time with them and just pestering them with questions. And they develop a technology called interferometric synthetic aperture sonar. And what this is, it's acoustic-based mapping, like we've been describing so far. But this is, instead of producing bathymetric maps, it produces images of the seafloor. So we're used to seeing side scan sonar images. So this is an example of synthetic aperture sonar. This image, what you're looking at here, is about 2 centimeter resolution. And you can see there is sort of a sandy bottom, but you can see there's an outcrop of hard rock. If you look in the middle, just to the right of the outcrop, you can see a rope, discarded rope or cable on the seafloor. So this gives you a sense of the resolution that we can generate with this technology. And the amazing thing about this is that this is an image being produced by sound. There's no light involved here. All of this is just from sound. Synthetic aperture sonar it's like regular side scan sonar, but the way the data are processed, you can sort of fake producing a much larger resolution image like this. Not only that, with this technology, we can also generate a high resolution bathymetric map that goes along with it. So here's some imagery from our project with Falkor 2 in Galapagos last year. And this is what a lava flow on the seafloor looks like. Again, this is about between 2 and 3 centimeter resolution. And this was created by putting the sensor on ROV Sebastian. Normally, you would put it on an AUV or on a sort of a towed vehicle. In this case, we tested doing this using an ROV, and you can clearly see there are pillow basalts here. There are some lobate flows that have been fractured. So not only can we see that this is a volcanic terrain, we can see the different types of lava that has erupted on the seafloor. This is now resolution where we think we can start to see biological features as well as just the larger scale geological features. This technology was developed initially, like most of the technology we're talking about today, for military purposes. And then it's been used a little bit more and more for things like offshore energy and pipelines and cables, wind farms. Well, we're now trying to push how we can use this sort of technology, this high resolution imagery, for purposes like this image here. This is a hydrothermal vent near the Galapagos that we imaged with the synthetic aperture sonar. And the vent is that sort of bright spot in the left-hand side of your screen. And you can see how the image is mostly quite crisp, but there's a sort of a line of fuzziness that goes from left to right across the screen. That fuzziness is because that vent was hydrothermally active. And therefore there's the smoke and the hot fluids coming out of that distort the acoustic signal as it propagates through seawater. And so not only could we see vents on the seafloor, with this technology, we can actually see whether or not they are active or inactive. So we're just starting now to sort of push the boundaries of what sort of environmental information we can get from the seafloor using this sort of higher and higher resolution mapping technology.
Thanks, John. Those are some great images. I'm going to stay zoomed in, if you will, and bounce back to Jenny. You mentioned and you showed some of the imagery about using the high resolution bathymetric maps to discover new hydrothermal vents. But I'm wondering, what are you looking for when you're on the ship and you're seeing that data come in? How do you actually find a new hydrothermal vent with the data that you're given when you're out at sea?
So in the meter scale data, we can see them because they look like spires or conical shapes rising up above the seafloor. The bathymetry doesn't tell us whether they're active or not. We need to use the data from the oxidation reduction potential sensor, for example, to get a sense of whether it's active or not, and then finally dive with the ROV and see for sure. What we're looking at here is an oblique image from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It's one of the chimney fields that we found on a seamount along the axis of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And there were several active chimneys in this field. You can see that they're conical shape. They were, I can't remember exactly how high these particular ones are. I'm going to call them 10 to 12 meters high, and several meters across. So it's not something you can see in the ship-based bathymetry. The seamount is about 1,900 meters deep. So the resolution of the ship-based data at this kind of depth is probably about 30 meters. And we really needed the meter scale mapping to be able to see them.
Excellent. And if I do recall, on the 2018 expedition, you did find some new hydrothermal vents and give them names. So that's really exciting.
Yes. Yeah. And the names were all from the native Kiowa language. We worked with our Mexican collaborators to name them.
Excellent. And John, before we go further with some other questions, we actually have a question from the audience for you. How big is the area of the INSAS data that you collected?
Oh, wow. Let me think about that. So I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the Galapagos project, again, I think like Alysha said, we don't spend all our time mapping, unfortunately. But with the ROV, we have a swath of about 300 meters. So we're collecting data up to 150 meters on either side of the vehicle, which is one of the powerful aspects of this technology, is that you collect that high resolution, that 3 centimeter resolution over that entire 300 meters, except for a bit underneath the vehicle, because side scan, it unlike multi-beam, which shoots downwards, this process, it shoots outwards. So there's always a gap underneath. So we would fly at about 1 knot, so pretty slow. And we was collecting data at sort of 300 meters. And we would do that. We probably did, I'm sort of pulling numbers out of my head here, but probably 6 or 7 surveys of 7 or 8 hours each collecting these data. And we did a lot of experimentation. We were working on a mid-ocean ridge, so the topography is it's a mountain, it's an underwater mountain range, and so you get a lot of shadows, and you get cliffs and all things blocking the sonar signals. And so there's a real process to try to figure out how to maximize the coverage area. And I have a PhD student, Caroline Genie. This is a big part of what her project is. Yeah, here, this is an image from the area we were working in. We actually discovered a brand new vent field called Tortugas, which you can see right in front of you. So kind of like the images Jenny was showing. In the middle of that screen, you can see some pinnacles standing out from the seafloor. These data we're looking at here are actually multi-beam data that we collected with the ROV. So this is about 1 meter resolution multi-beam data. So we collect these data first, and then we would go back and cover pretty much this entire area doing the synthetic aperture sonar surveys. So I can't give an exact number of total area, but it would have been several tens of square kilometers of seafloor that we collected on this particular project. If you put that sensor on an AUV, you can collect data over much wider areas.
Excellent, thank you. A lot of data and a pretty big area, it sounds like. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit and go back to talking about discoveries made with the actual vessel. And Tomer, Jenny, and John were talking about discovering hydrothermal vents and things like that. And you've been on 2 recent expeditions where we have newly mapped seamounts or discovered new seamounts. Could you talk a little bit about what that process is like when you first discover something, or how you find a new seamount to map, how you even get the ship in a location that you think might be something new underneath, and what is your next steps? Are you going to name the seamounts or have them formally identified?
All right. Yeah, thanks, Allison. That's a great question. So first, I'd like to say that it's actually has been a very prolific year or so for the Falkor 2 science teams. We've had, I think, 12 seamount discoveries and 12 new seamount discoveries. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do it. Basically, sometimes we are lucky and we just stumble upon a new feature on the way on transit to a new research location. And for example, like this one, the Hannah's showing us, that one ended up being about 3,000 meters high, if I believe. if I remember correctly. And then sometimes we actually base our ship track on a predicted model that predicts the location of larger features like that are potentially seamounts based on satellite gravity measurements. That's a very kind of crude method to do it, but that's the best tool we have to try to discover new things. So we use that model, we plan a ship route, we operate our ship-based sonars, usually the EM-124, which is the deep water echo sounder. And then if it's a good day, then we discover another feature. And then we try to complete the entire coverage of that feature. As Alysha mentioned, there are many different kinds of features on the bottom. Some of them are seamounts by definition, some of them are geodes, and there are other knolls and ridges and depressions and many other types of names that are defined by a special committee that is called the Subcommittee on Underwater Feature Names, SCUFN for short. It's kind of hosted under the UN IOC and UNESCO, and they kind of standardize that field and set the standards for what is actually defined, for example, seamount. So a seamount has to be at least 1,000 meters higher than the surrounding seafloor. Anything lower than that is not technically a seamount. And then within that category of seamounts, there are different kinds. If it's a completely flat top, it's a geode. But if it has a secondary peak or another volcanic cone on the peak, then it's not a geode because it might have been exposed to above the seafloor, but then it had more volcanic activity after that. So, of course, the first step is discovering. The second step would be to define what type of feature it is based on the multi-beam data that we collect. And then the third step is to actually fill in a form that holds all the information about the location, the dimensions, the shape, and of course, why we would pick a certain name for it. So, so far we're compiling some ideas for names based on the geographic location that they're found. I'm right now working on four seamounts that we discovered last December during the transit. All of them in the Eastern Pacific. So yeah, it's a lot of work to process all that data and make the images and the measurements that we need, and of course, trying to find names for them. That's actually the most fun part for me.
Looking forward to the announcements when it's official and they have names. That will be very exciting. I want to turn from the research component of seafloor mapping to maybe what we might call some real world applications. And Alysha, with the data that we collected in Australia, I know the Australian government has been using it to promote what the seafloor looks like and create a lot of flyovers and animations that they use. And some of the data that you even used in your dissertation was collected in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. How might a manager of the marine park or the Australian government use some of the data that was collected to fulfill their job duties?
The way to use this data is like the possibilities are almost endless. There's so much that can be done. So Australia has a phenomenal online system called AusSeabed, in which people can share data, and that data gets standardized into a certain format and then made publicly available. And this data includes contributions from the government themselves, from various industry members from universities, And during the year in which Schmidt Ocean Institute was in Australia, they contributed a huge amount of data, including the 2 voyages I was on, which is really exciting. And it does mean that it can be used by the wider community. And there's been even more work to make the data coverage even better in Australia based on the data we have available. So Tomer indicated some of the satellite information that's present, which is great, but we can make that even better by the data we have. And there's some really clever folks at James Cook University, Geoscience Australia, the Hydrographic Office, and Sydney University who've done a standardized 250-kilometre topographic grid of all of Australian seafloor, which is amazing. So you can go out there and you can get a really quick look at what's going on in the seafloor. And this can look really different in different parts of Australia. So I mostly know about the East Coast because that's where my volcanoes are. And around that coast, we have a thin section of continental shelf, which is about 40 kilometres wide, going down into the deeper ocean, about 4,000 metres deep. And so when it comes to a government or a managing perspective, this could be factoring in bathymetry and what the seafloor looks like to any modelling of the ocean, any modelling of what conditions might be happening, such as for the Great Barrier Reef, or how currents might move through the ocean. It might affect fisheries. So seamounts in particular are known to be locations of upwelling. So deep ocean currents will interact with them and bring nutrients up to the surface. And that is really interesting for fisheries because that means there's a bunch of primary producers of living things that are suddenly accumulating around seamounts. And that, of course, is important to not only fisheries, but also marine parks. So an area which we surveyed was in the Coral Sea Marine Park, and giving the government more information that they might have to make managing decisions on that is, of course, absolutely necessary. And then a final thing to flag, this one is a bit low risk, but it's something that crosses my field of study as a geomorphologist, is when we look at slopes of underwater features, we can look at slope stability. So we can have a look at what is the probability of there being an underwater landslide. And so you can think of this as happening on some of the sides of my volcanoes or the edge of the continental shelf of Australia. And as I said, this is really low probability and low risk, but if you get a big enough one, it can cause tsunamis. So it's an important thing for governments to understand and to know the chance of that happening in the local area.
Thanks, Alysha. As you said, a lot to think about if you're a marine park manager responsible for knowing about the seafloor. So knowledge is definitely key in this regards. John, you briefly mentioned at the beginning of your presentation seafloor mining, and I was wondering if you wanted to add to what Alysha said and if there's anything that related to seafloor mapping that could have an impact on deep sea mining.
Oh, I think definitely. There's sort of 2 aspects to that question. The first is from the mining and exploration point of view. You know, geologists looking for ore deposits on land, you always start with a map, a geological map, a topographic map. The seafloor is no different. The distribution of mineral resources is not, they're not everywhere. And so you have to have an understanding of the geology in order to know where to look. So all of this requires maps. The higher resolution the map you have, the better detail you're going to get. And again, higher and higher resolution, you could start to even identify specific rock types like we see here. So from that point of view, mapping technology is crucial for our ability to find mineral deposits on the seafloor. More coverage area, higher resolution. But then there's also okay, if we do, I mean, seafloor mining is not a thing that has happened yet, but it might happen soon. And so besides finding deposits on the seafloor, it's things like environmental monitoring. So again, higher resolution data allow us to potentially monitor changes to the environment. How much of the seafloor has been disturbed? Is there greater degrees of sedimentation in certain areas than there were prior to mining activities? What is the extent of the environmental disturbance associated with any of these activities. So seafloor mining, seafloor mapping, I think will plays a critical role to the potential future of seafloor mining by helping us find resources on the seafloor and then being able to manage how those resources are extracted in a way that we can minimize damage and monitor for damage.
Well said. Thank you, John. We have a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to start with one that any of you can answer. Someone asked, what's the most interesting evidence of a lower sea level that you have seen from your mapping data? Are there any familiar above sea level landscapes that may seem trapped in another world?
I'll jump in on this one. This isn't actually from the Falkor dataset, but this is from a dataset I collected earlier this year. A paleo shoreline is a section of a bathymetry that might be recorded that shows where a shoreline was in the past. So when sea level was lower, it might leave something like a dune field or erosion. And we successfully found one about 90 meters deep off the east coast of Australia, which was really, really exciting. I probably can't say more at the moment, but yeah, it's definitely been one of the highlights of my days at sea so far.
I can add one. This is not data that we collected with the Falkor either, but we have a paper actually coming out this week probably about permafrost melting on the Canadian Beaufort margin and how that's modified the seafloor, and that is an example of how comparing maps made over time is a useful tool for monitoring and detecting change.
Very interesting. I'll look for that paper. John, do you have anything to add?
If you could bring back that image with the rope on the seafloor and that rock outcrop, that outcrop is located in about 60-meter depth. And on that outcrop, you can see these what are essentially glacial striations. So these are scraping marks from past ice caps moving over the ground, and this would only happen when these rocks are either very shallow or exposed on land. So there are essentially land-based glacial features that we can resolve using the synthetic aperture sonar on these rock outcrops from when sea level was much lower during glacial periods.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for showing that in the imagery. We have one other question. I think it's directed at Jenny, so I'll let her answer first, and then if the others want to chime in, they can. But someone asked, can you use infrared to detect heat data and locate vents on the seafloor that way?
We haven't done that. I suppose you could. We are looking at potentially being able to measure temperatures with Raman spectroscopy from the LiDAR. That is still completely untested, but I don't know about the infrared.
Yeah, I can add that normally a lot of the electromagnetic spectrum and is absorbed by the water, and anything that is red immediately disappears in the water. There's hardly any red light, and of course infrared and anything above that is not going to travel very far. So to measure temperature, we just measure it directly. And to measure it remotely, like Jenny said, there's some technology maybe based on LiDAR that is under development, but there's no, as far as I know, there's not a way to measure temperature remotely in the water.
I think that's a great question, because I remember, I think, Tomer, we were having these discussions when we were out at sea and having some difficulties trying to, get our temperature probe into a hard to reach spot. And there's got to be a way we could just do it with infrared or something like that. So that's a great question to ask, because we're all thinking along those exact same lines all the time.
Yeah, I think there's the whole field of acoustic oceanography, um, which is the study of the ocean water itself through acoustic energy, is developing quite fast. And I think there might be some papers on that. Not super up to date, but as far as I know, that is also happening. But infrared does not travel far in the water, sadly. Otherwise, we could probably see the seafloor.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. We have another question, Tomer. I think you alluded to this in your opening statement, so I'll let you handle this one, but anyone else can add in, of course. How much of the seafloor has currently been mapped, and how long do you think it would take to map the entire seafloor?
So right now, the official statistics from Seabed 2030 is about 26.1% or something like that. Is the last update that they gave. And Seabed 2030 is a collaborative project that started, I think, in 2018 or 2017 to try to assemble all of the existing seafloor data and make one big global map out of it. And the year they started, I think it was somewhere around 7% or something like that. So within a few years, that number, tripled or more than tripled to 26%. And with their initial goal of getting to 100% until 2030, it might take a little longer than that, because it takes a lot of time and resources to really map with the multi-beam the entire seafloor. And if you can kind of think about the other 74% of the ocean that hasn't been mapped, and break that down to an average depth of maybe 4,000 meters and a multi-beam that can cover a swath of maybe, let's say, 10 kilometers, and multiply that by ship speed, which would be 6 to 8 knots, or let's say 8 knots. That will take a significant number of ship years to complete. So we definitely need either a lot more ships or a lot more time, or a leap in technology to really complete that goal within the next decade or two.
Yeah, it's a very ambitious goal, but hopefully working together, we can at least get close to it on Earth. I will add that Schmidt Ocean Institute puts all of their data from Falkor and the ROV in Seabed 2030. So we are contributing to that project and its goals. We are almost out of time. We have about 8 minutes left. And so I'm going to ask my last question in kind of a round robin style, and we'll let you all have a chance to respond. But I was wondering if you could talk about what you're working on now with regards to analyzing some seabed mapping data, a new discovery, or if you aren't ready to share a new discovery or a new insight that you have, maybe a challenge that you're facing while you're working with the data that you have right now. So let's start with Alysha, the new PhD grad, and she can update us on what she's working on now.
Oh, awesome. I love that title. I could get used to that. Earlier this year, I was on the Investigator, which is the Australian government's research vessel, and we got to spend a month on board, and that project was around looking at submarine canyons And so we mapped 2 submarine canyons off the coast of the east coast of Australia. And a lot of the voyage was focused on oceanography, so looking at how the East Australian current interacts with the canyons as well. But I was primarily interested in the canyons themselves, and we got a lot of underwater imagery during that voyage. And so I'm very keen to have a go at trying to combine some of this underwater imagery with the bathymetry and see what kind of observations we can make out about the seafloor. And that is all very much still in action, still in go. I have to credit CSIRO and the National Marine Facility as well for the investigator and for the work that they've run.
Awesome. Well, good luck on that, and congratulations on the PhD, by the way. Jenny, would you like to go next?
Sure. So a project we've been involved with for a number of years has been monitoring axial seamount, which is an active volcano that's about 250 miles off of the state of Oregon in the northeastern Pacific. And it is currently inflating as magma is refilling the chamber towards its next eruption. The last one was in 2015, it also erupted in 2011 and 1998. And we got before and after maps from those recent eruptions to be able to difference them and see exactly where the flow boundaries are and the volumes of them. But because we can detect about 10 centimeters change with the AUVs, we can, if we run the same line over the edifice, so we've got an interesting pattern that we've been running year after year after year with our AUVs and with the AUV Sentry, we can watch the whole edifice inflate towards the next eruption. And that brings me to a challenge that we've been working on. Of course, navigation has to be really, really good to run exactly the same lines time and time again. And so we've been developing terrain relative navigation where the vehicle can actually alter its course to stay on a line based on the existing map that it has. And then in post-processing also, we've been developing tools to be able to match features and develop a better navigation model.
Excellent. Sounds like you're staying busy.
Yeah.
John, you are almost approaching 1 year since you were on board Falkor 2. Do you have any new discoveries or insights to share from your expedition?
I just want to start by saying, Jenny, that data set you guys have been collecting is like one of the coolest things on the seafloor. Just those difference maps before and after eruptions are so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been almost what we've discovered is the problem with high resolution data is that there's just so much information that's being collected. And so that's we're nowhere near going through in detail all of the synthetic aperture sonar imagery that we collected on that Galapagos cruise. So, for us, yeah, the biggest challenge is the amount of data. But what we have been doing is really documenting what we can see that we couldn't see before using regular traditional side scan sonar or AUV or ROV mounted multi-beam systems. And we are we're blown away by the amount of detail. Not only can you see pillow lavas, but you can see the little wrinkles on top of pillow lavas. And it showed that picture of the discarded rope. Unfortunately, one of the things we do find a lot of is mostly discarded fishing gear on the seafloor, which is always a bit sort of disappointing, I guess, when you find trash. But right now, okay, I guess one of the big things for us is, besides the geological features, what sort of biological features can we see from this imagery? So we've been looking at areas where from the ROV, we know we have clam beds and we know we have, tube worms. And so we're really working through as to what we can see. That's going to be very important, especially when it comes to things like monitoring change at the seafloor. And can you monitor these things acoustically? Will be a real game changer if we can. So still a bit of work to do, but that's where we're focusing our efforts right now.
Excellent. Keep us updated. I'm excited to hear how everything's going. And Tomer, you mentioned lots of paperwork to name some new features from when you were on board. And I know you're at home now, but I think you're returning to the vessel soon. Would you like to talk about what's next for you?
Yeah, definitely. I took home some homework, some data from the previous expeditions that we had on Falkor 2. And I was mostly focusing on the December transit that we did from Costa Rica all the way down to Chile. And that was a very long, it was about 2 weeks. And we discovered 4 seamounts on that one alone. And I've invested some time into processing that data and creating the layers of information that we need to put together naming proposals. And I've done some research on a theme that will include 4 names of these very large seamounts. Some of them are 3,500 meters, I think, high. 3,500, sorry. So that's mostly what I've been working on lately. Before that, when I was still on the ship, we put together a proposal for a completely new seamount that we discovered within the Nazca Ridge, in the southern end of the Nazca Ridge. That was in the July expedition. I was co-chief scientist on that one. And that one was already submitted. So fingers crossed it gets approved. And yeah, I'll be back on the ship next week. So hopefully more discoveries to come.
Yes, everyone, stay tuned for our next expedition. We'll be live streaming and hopefully making a lot of new discoveries, and maybe we'll have some announcements about some new named seamounts as well. So I want to thank everyone. We're right at the top of the hour to end this Back Ashore, but thank you to Jenny, John, Alysha, and Tomer. Thank you to everyone who tuned in virtually for this, and we will see you all soon. Thanks again.